So I was in federal court against the Pentagon for 7 years. I spent $1 million and I won. And all I want to know was, can you show me the names of the firms that you're giving small business contracts to? All right, and I won. Want to see what I got?
So that's all redacted, I assume.
That's the actual document.
That's the biggest redaction I've ever seen in a single piece. I've seen redactions where the entire document has like 4 or 5 words, but in terms of just a pure black square, that I think that's the record of redaction I've ever seen. Lloyd, why don't you give everyone a quick introduction to yourself, what you do, and also be sure to plug websites or Twitters you want everyone to visit, and then we'll do that again at the end as well. You'll have 2 opportunities.
All right. Well, my name is Lloyd Chapman. I'm the president and founder of the American Small Business League. And what I do is I sue the federal government to expose fraud in the largest economic stimulus program for the American people in history, the Small Business Act. I've been doing it now for 32 years. And my lawyers tell me I've won a record number of Freedom of Information Act legal battles against the government. I've won 110. And I'm very proud of my win ratio. I've won 98.5% of my lawsuits against the government. Wow. And they don't like me for some reason. I don't understand it.
What made you want to start doing that? Like, what was the inspiration?
It was an accident. My father was a contracting officer for the Air Force in Sacramento, and he had been he worked for the CIA up in Virginia for a number of years. And I went to work for a little computer company, and he told me to do a Freedom of Information request on government contractors trying to find. Government contractors are trying to find small businesses to do business with. And I didn't know anything about it. So I did it. And back then, the law said that small business should get a minimum of 20% of all federal contracts. And the first one I did was a very large contract. And the small business goal was 16/100% of 1%. I thought it was a typo. And I called the guy up at the Air Force and said, no, that's it. And I called Barbara Boxer, my congresswoman at that time. She hooked me up with Les Aspin, back in those days was chair of the House Armed Services Committee. There was a huge congressional investigation, a lot of stories in the media, and they were forced to give small businesses an additional $501 million. And I thought, hey, this is easy.
Yeah. And so that's basically what was the inspiration. You were like, well, this worked once, why not keep doing it?
Exactly.
And what do you guys look for, particularly when you're going after the federal government?
I'm trying to expose the fact that the government's cheating small businesses and woman-owned small businesses, minority-owned small businesses, and service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses. And I've prompted, I don't know, maybe somewhere between 10 and 20 federal investigations. And I've had investigative stories in every major news program in America and all the major newspapers, a lot of stuff on the internet. But we just expose the fact that the government's cheating the American people out of about $300 billion a year.
Can you give our audience a breakdown as to why that is and how that works?
All right. So today, federal law says that small businesses shall get a minimum of 23% of the total value of all federal contracts. And that would be about over $350 billion a year. So what they do, the Small Business Administration does this, they exclude over $1 trillion in federal acquisitions from that calculations, and they include billions in contracts to Fortune 500 firms and their subsidiaries in that number. And every year for 20 years, the Small Business Administration has fabricated compliance with that goal, again, by excluding $1 trillion and including billions in contracts to Fortune 500 firms. People can Google Fortune 500 firms landing federal small business contracts and see the stories, that have been out there for, decades. But it's
so it's basically large monopolies taking advantage of loopholes that allow them to use the system. Is that how they're pulling it off?
Well, I think it's that, but mainly it's the government fabricating compliance with this goal. And most people don't realize that the largest economic stimulus program in history for the American people is the Small Business Act. Nothing's bigger than that. Nothing's ever come close to that. So that law would direct, like I said, over $350 billion in existing federal infrastructure spending into the middle class. But as opposed to 23, all the experts that I've talked with and all the data shows they're getting maybe 3%, not 23%.
Wow.
And that has that's been devastating to the middle class economy.
Where's the rest of it going?
It goes to Fortune 500 firms, big businesses.
The ones that need it the most.
Yeah, here's some data that will shock people. 99% of all companies in America have less than 500 employees. That means only 1% have over 500 employees. Today, 97% of all federal spending goes to less than 1% of U.S. firms, and that 1% hasn't created one net new job since 1980, and many of them pay zero federal income tax. So think where that's going to lead us, let's just say 5 or 10 years down the road, when the government is spending 97% of our tax dollars with less than 1% of the U.S. companies, and those companies don't create jobs and many don't pay their income taxes. The other thing that I figured out over the weekend is that today federal law says that 5% of that 23%, 5% goes to women and 5% to minorities. So check my math on this. So half the population are women, right?
Checks out.
And about a fourth of the population are minorities. So women and minorities make up 75% of the population. So if the government complied with the law and gave women and minorities the 5% that the law says they get, that means Caucasian male-owned companies would get 90% of all federal spending. Does that make sense to you?
Well, it doesn't make sense. The numbers probably make sense, but yeah, but it sounds I don't know, abhorrent to say the least.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about that grant itself? You said it's one of the largest grants, the $350 billion, the Small Business Act. Can you describe what that is a little bit?
Yeah. So the Small Business Act was passed in 1953 when Dwight Eisenhower was the president, and it said back in those days, I think it said the actual law said a fair portion of the total value of all federal contracts or subcontracts shall be awarded to small businesses. And over the years, that was modified to where in 2021, the law says that small business shall get a minimum of 23% of the total value of all federal contracts. And that's over 1.5 trillion. Some people think it's as high as 2 trillion if you include, top secret spending, black projects, whatever, but it's at least 1.5 trillion. And when you compare that to for example, the American, with that TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, that gave small businesses $1 billion. The American Reinvestment Recovery Act gave them $2 billion, and that's a one-time shot. The Small Business Act is every year, in perpetuity, and would be $350 billion plus. So
and how little of that did you say was going to actual small businesses?
It looks like maybe 3% of all federal spending goes to small businesses at most, and it's supposed to be,
where you said it should be 23%. Was that?
Should be 23.
Okay, but it's only 3.
The Small Business Administration fabricates that number every year. Again, there's been articles about that. I think one article called it fuzzy math. Public Citizen did a report called Slighted. People can look that up. Slighted by Public Citizen. Mother Jones did a story a few years ago entitled Corporate Giants Reaping Billions in Federal Small Business Contracts. But there's been, well over 100 stories about it in the mainstream media for over 20 years. But,
and why does nothing change outside of your lawsuits?
Well, it's money.
Mm-hmm.
If you want, money controls our government. I think most people probably might not believe this, but Congress runs on money. If you're a senator or representative, you have to raise money to be elected to Congress. Barack Obama told me many years ago that he had to raise $50,000 a day, to keep his Senate seat.
To be competitive.
You got to go to big businesses. And of course, they're the ones, they want to give you the money. They're lined up to give you money. So if you're elected to Congress, there'll be lobbyists lined up to give you money, and donate money to your, campaign and things of that nature. So unfortunately, our government is influenced almost completely, by money. I saw a study by an independent think tank a couple of years ago that said that 95% of legislation that's passed is passed because it's what big businesses want. And only 5% of the time does Congress pass legislation that the public wants. So, yeah, it's money, it's greed, it's corruption, it's fraud. And in what was it, 2005, the SBA Inspector General released Report 515. People can look that up on the internet. And it said this: one of the largest challenges facing the Small Business Administration and the entire federal government today is that large businesses are receiving federal small business procurement awards. And
why is that one of the largest problems? Can you explain that?
Well, it's the largest economic stimulus program for the American people. It's being completely basically repealed. I would say it's been repealed. Another thing that most people don't know is the Small Business Administration has essentially been closed. So it's still there. They've got a website, but their budget has been cut more than any agency in history. So I don't think anyone can find a federal agency in the last 30 years that's had their budget cut as much as the SBA. When Ronald Reagan was elected president, I think the SBA budget was around $2 billion. So with normal inflation today, it should be around $4 billion. It's only $700 million. So the Pentagon, spends well over $1 trillion, and the only agency in our government to help the 30 million small businesses where most Americans work has a budget of $700 million. It's essentially, I think it's been closed.
So there's a lot of talk right now about things like, and I want to ask you about $15 minimum wage, for example, and how you think that it impacts like small businesses versus larger businesses. You're saying, in essence, though, that this huge amount of stimulus money that's given every single year by the federal government, the $350 billion, the majority of it going not where it should be going, right? You said it should, a certain percentage should be reaching small businesses. It's not. And yet this is causing the larger companies that obviously have the monopoly in this case to take those funds to use it for themselves, while at the same time they're not becoming job creators, even though there's kind of been this idea within modern society that it is these titans of industry that are also providing us with all the jobs that we need to survive, like the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Googles, right? How does that actually bear out in reality?
Well, the Chapman Foundation did a study about 10 years ago, maybe more, and Fortune 500 firms as a group have not created one net new job since 1980. So maybe Google's hiring, maybe Amazon's hiring, but as a group, they're losing jobs. More and more jobs are being shipped overseas. So Fortune 500 firms have not created one net new job since 1980. And all you have to do is go to, Google, Fortune 500 firms not paying federal income tax. You'll see, pages and pages of stories. Bernie Sanders talked about that a lot. So, but yeah, it should be $350 billion. I think probably maybe $50 billion are going to legitimate small businesses at the most. And it's devastating to the middle class economy. About 10 years ago, the Senate did a study that said for every 1% federal contracts to small businesses went up, it would create 100,000 jobs a year. Okay, so every 1% is 100,000 jobs. So small business is supposed to get 23%. They're getting 3. If President Biden made sure the small business got the full 23%, that would be an additional 20%. And according to the Senate study, that would create 2 million new jobs a year. That would virtually double the number of new jobs that are created in America from year to year. And again, that would be deficit neutral, free and easy, no new spending, no new taxes, just comply with the law that was passed in 1953 and make sure that every federal agency gives legitimate small businesses a minimum of 23% of all their contracts.
And how do we do that?
I would do it if I were President Biden. I would do it with an executive order.
No, yeah, I know, but since neither of us are Biden at this time, how do we do it in general? Like, how do we have to apply political pressure to just tell them to do their job? That's it.
Absolutely.
Or does it have to happen through lawsuits? Or
well, the first thing is people need to realize certain things. Again, that the Small Business Act is the largest economic stimulus program for the middle class in history. They need to realize that here's a shocking statistic: 89% of all companies in America have less than 20 employees, and those firms are responsible for over 97% of all net new jobs. So if you're trying to create jobs, that's where the money should go. But again, that's the money's not going there. The money's going to big businesses, right? The PPP program was a good example. That was supposed to be, to help small businesses. Most of the money went to very big companies. The largest recipient got 30 million. There was some very wealthy man who owned a chain of hotels, around the world. And but yeah, it's any federal program that has the word small business in it. When you look into it, all the money's going to millionaires, billionaires, and Fortune 500 firms. It's been that way for 30 years. And by the way, it doesn't matter who the president is, Democrat, Republican. So cheating the middle class is a bipartisan issue. And it's astounding. But yeah, people need to, look into it. Take 10 minutes and Google Fortune 500 firms landing federal small business contracts. And then whatever you can do, whether you want to blog about it or go on Twitter or Facebook or, call your congressman, call anybody in the media. This should be on national television. I'll tell you something interesting. You can't talk about this on national television. They won't put it on there. You'll notice that if you watch, the national media, they never talk about small business as much. And I'll tell you why. National media, their customers are their advertisers. Mm-hmm. And who advertises on national media? Well, Fortune 500 firms. Small businesses don't advertise on CNN and ABC and NBC and CBS. It's Burger King, Pizza Hut, big businesses. And one of the scams that big businesses try to pull is they'll say, cut our taxes so we can create jobs. When Trump was elected, that was the first couple of weeks he was in office. He was talking about we need to cut taxes for big businesses.
They've been doing that since Reagan's era, trickle-down economics, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Well, the bottom line is big businesses don't create jobs, and they haven't, for 40 years. So small businesses create jobs. In fact, when you look at the U.S. economy, half the gross domestic product comes from small businesses, half the private sector workforce, and over 90% of all U.S. exports come from small businesses. So any way you can look at it, small businesses are the heart and soul of America's economy. It's the engine of our economy. And yet when you look at national media, it's all about, the stock market and the Dow Jones and Fortune 500 firms. And that's not, the engine of our economy. It's small businesses.
What is your thought on the $15 minimum wage argument, both being implemented potentially, I believe, by 2024, as well as the concept that by doing so, or even doing so immediately, it would result in a massive collapse of small businesses if they would have to pay their workers a living wage?
What I'll have to say, I don't really know much about that. I don't know much about that. I think that when you think about small businesses, I think about small businesses in my neighborhood. Like my laundry, he probably has 10 people working there. And what's the minimum wage today? I don't even know. What is it today? Is it like
in the U.S.? I think it's $8.25.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that guy, I was just over there today. If he had to start paying people $15 an hour, that might be difficult.
Oh, sorry, $7.25. People are correcting me. Yeah.
Yeah. That might be hard for him. Now, for big businesses, it wouldn't be a problem. So what I might do is, if I were the president, of course, this is like, King Solomon situation, trying to come up with the right answer, right? But I would think that I would maybe draw the line. The company with 100 employees or less, might have some type of exemption on that, but the bigger businesses wouldn't. For example, if Jeff Bezos had to pay all his employees a minimum $50 an hour, he wouldn't even notice it, right? He wouldn't even notice it. But if you're, my neighbors down the street have a jewelry store, and it's a husband and wife, and they have one employee, right? So if they had to start paying somebody $50 an hour, that would have a big impact on them. But if Burger King or McDonald's had to do it, it would be negligible. It would cut into their profits maybe. But here's a funny thing that might not be related to this, but Henry Ford paid his workers like twice as much as anybody else, and they all bought his cars. I don't know if you know that story, right? But
yeah, it's one of the reasons that he actually like invented the 7-day work week so that people would have time off to be able to purchase his own products.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it takes somebody with a lot more education, economics than me to come up with a good answer to that. But it sounds like they would be virtually doubling the minimum wage.
Yeah, if it was going from 725 in
That would
instance.
be,
But I mean, the idea being if you can't like afford to pay your workers a living wage, then the business itself might not even be something that should be implemented in the first place. The second one being that if wages were rising in congruence with inflation, for example, they would be much higher than $15 an hour today. Right, like I mean, they stopped raising effectively for a series of reasons, but yeah, and the end result of that is just the marginalization of a huge swath of the American electorate.
absolutely. The middle class in America, their purchasing power and their economic strength has gone down, every year for probably 40, 50 years. Robert Reich has a documentary called Inequality for All that talks about that. Very, very good documentary. People should watch that. But yeah, I guess another thing that happens is every year for the last 40 years, Fortune 500 firms have paid a smaller and smaller percentage of the overall tax revenue that the government collects. And that needs to change. If I were the president, I'd only be a one-term president because I couldn't get reelected. The Fortune 500 firms would probably, run me out of town. But what we need to do is get those big companies like Amazon to start paying their fair share of taxes. I don't know if this is true, but I heard that Amazon pays no federal income tax.
No, that is true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just insane.
But do you have a way of approaching that or tackling that from your perspective? Because you, in essence, work within the realm of doing lawsuits for smaller companies, right?
Well, my expertise is in Freedom of Information Act litigation against the government. That's the essence of what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, freedom of
can you explain that a little bit? Because I know sometimes people hear Freedom of Information Act. I know Ken Klippenstein, by the way, that's his bread and butter. But can you get into a little bit of detail of that for everyone?
Yeah. So one misconception about the Freedom of Information Act is that private companies have to comply with it. No, only the federal government has to comply with the Freedom of Information Act. And you can ask for documents. You can't force them to do research and studies. You can say, I'd like these documents. So it only affects federal agencies, the federal government, and you can ask for documents. And unfortunately, that's, I would say, largely been repealed. So the Freedom of Information Act has sort of been repealed. And if you do a Freedom of Information request and they deny it, you file an appeal, just a letter says I'm appealing your denial. And then if they deny that, your only choice is to go to court. And it's kind of surprising when I think about it, but the Justice Department is responsible for that. I'll show you something. I think you and your viewers will find this interesting. So I was in federal court against the Pentagon for 7 years. I spent $1 million and I won. And all I want to know was, can you show me the names of the firms that you're giving small business contracts to? All right, and I won. Want to see what I got?
So that's all redacted, I assume.
That's the actual document.
That's the biggest redaction I've ever seen in a single piece. I've seen redactions where the entire document has like 4 or 5 words, but in terms of just a pure black square, I think that's the record of redaction I've ever seen. Yeah.
Yeah. They've redacted the people that signed it on the front. But yeah. So all the pages that have the names of the firms that they gave small business contracts to have been redacted. And again, I won. This looks like I lost. No, I won.
So they're still allowed to redact whatever they feel is necessary for, what is it, internal security? Is that why?
Well, you know what? If this information, I believe, would have shown that the Pentagon's committing contracting fraud by reporting contracts to subsidiaries of Fortune 500 firms as small businesses, and the law doesn't allow that. In fact, I tell you the truth, I know that's what it said. That's why I asked for it. See, that's why I asked for it. I only ask for information that I know is going to expose fraud. And if the Pentagon, if I was wrong, and the Pentagon was not committing fraud and reporting contracts to the subsidiaries of Fortune 500 firms as small businesses, they would just give it to me. See, I've learned that. I've been doing this for 32 years, and I've learned when you ask for some simple information and they fight like hell to not release it, it's exposing, corruption and fraud. But quite frankly, the names of the firms that the Pentagon gives small business contracts to should be something you should pull up on the computer. Should be on the internet. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have to go to federal court for 7 years to spend $1 million. This was a 26-page document? Yeah, 26 pages, 7 years, $1 million in legal fees. And we can't tell, who they're giving contracts to. So in that case, here's a quote. Judge William Alsop said this: "The purpose of the Freedom of Information Act is so the public can see how our government works. Congress passed this law so small businesses could have access to these contracts, and here's the United States covering it up." So a federal judge in open court accused the United States government of covering up this information. And that's exactly what they did. But yeah.
How has COVID affected all this in terms of because I know you were speaking a little bit about PPP earlier and how different contracts are being awarded and obviously being gobbled up by big companies. How does it work out that a guy who owns a bunch of chains, international hotel chains, gets 30 million, or was it 30 million or was it 300 million?
1 million actually, 30.1.
From the government, when that money should be going towards small businesses to make sure they don't close down?
Well, that program was designed that way. So that wasn't someone cheating or, it was designed that way. So let's go back to those statistics. So 89% of all U.S. firms have less than 20 employees. The average American company has 10 employees. When Congress wrote that bill, they wrote it so the companies with up to 5 employees per location could participate in that program. That would mean, I would think, every Hyatt hotel in the country could apply for PPP as a small business, right? So when 99% of all the companies have less than 5 employees, and you write a piece of legislation that says that companies with up to 5 employees per location can participate, it was designed that way. So I would say the whole program was from the beginning fraudulent. Mm-hmm. That's what Congress does. They attach small business. Anytime you hear somebody from Congress talking about small business, yeah, put your hand in your wallet.
So it's basically just a political buzzword to be able to sell something.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I want to say it was TARP. I remember seeing Bush, Obama, and McCain on national television saying we need to pass this legislation so that small businesses can have access to capital. I remember that. And then after it passed, CNN did a study to show that access to capital for small businesses dropped 50%. So after it passed, access to capital for small business actually was cut dramatically. I had a friend who had a successful small business, and she had large credit lines on credit cards that they would buy little small things that the customers wanted. And all the credit card companies cut their credit limit in half for no reason. She had a pristine credit rating, and they cut all of her credit cards in half after TARP was passed. But yeah, it's very sad. When I talk about it like this, it's depressing because it's gone on for decades. And when Obama was elected, he put out a press release after I talked to him, and he said something like, most Americans work for small businesses. We must protect this valuable resource, and it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. He put that out, and I was thrilled. 2 days later, he took off that last sentence that said it's time to end the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants, right? And I was very disappointed during his administration. It just continued, unabated as it had, before him, and it continued after him.
I have to ask this. When you're talking about small businesses, do you consider worker cooperatives to be included within that?
You know what? I have to say I'm not super familiar with worker cooperatives, but I'm saying it's a small business. I would say yes.
Yeah, so the idea would be that they'd probably have, if you're defining small businesses as what, less than 150 or 500 employees?
I would say if I was a federal judge, I would say 100 employees and less.
Okay, so the idea would be that it's scalable, but whatever company you would have, they would be co-owned within everyone who's working within the company, allowing them all to have more democracy in their workplace, for example. So they would be able to be involved in the decision making as opposed to just the sole, like either a CEO or a single board having control over all the employees. They would be able to do that collectively.
Yeah, I would say as long as they had less than 100 employees. Let's just say if a Fortune 500 firm, were to set it up so the employees had a stronger voice, or set up as a collective, whatever, I don't think that would be a small business. But
so for you, it's defined as the size of the company, not the ownership of the employees themselves.
Again, I'm dealing with federal programs and federal law,
mm-hmm.
and
well, that was going to be my question as well. Is are they applicable for the same things? Like, does a worker cooperative under a certain amount of people also get to apply for those kind of grants?
Yeah. Again, I'm not very knowledgeable about worker collectives. I don't know much about that. Right? It's not the type of business that works in the federal, marketplace. But it's a great idea, by the way. I've been a fan of that for many, many years. And oh yeah. Yeah, I've been a fan of that for a long time. Probably, I think I heard about that 40 years ago. And I think it's a great idea for small businesses, by the way, to kind of set their companies up that way, so that when the company does well, the employees, share in the profits, of that success. I think it's a great idea.
What's next on your docket for big, are you in the middle of some big lawsuits, I assume? Because the way litigation works, it's got to be a constant process.
Yeah, I've been in court with the government pretty much continually for 30 years. And I've had as many as 12 cases at one time in the courts. Right now I've got, I think 3. And you remember the Small Business Act says 23% of the total value of all federal contracts?
Mm-hmm.
So I did a Freedom of Information Act request to the Office of Management Budget, asking them what the federal acquisition budget is, and they won't give it to me. So that lets me know that I'm right.
That's when you're like, I'm onto something here. Yeah.
Yeah. If I was wrong, they go, here it is, But the federal government doesn't want you to know how much they're spending or how they're spending it, And of course, that's, exactly what you want to know.
Does this apply uniquely to the federal government? Does this not apply to anything on the state level? Or do they have their own programs on the state level? Or that's just not in your purview?
Well, you know what? I've worked with the California Open Records Act here in California. So different states have, some type of Open Records Act. Almost all states do, I would imagine, right? But I've done a little bit of work with the California Open Records Act. But mainly I'm doing, freedom of information litigation with the federal government. But I've got another one asking for documents from the Small Business Administration. And the only 2 lawsuits I've lost in my lifetime, I was trying to get the phone records for the gentleman who ran the SBA's press office, because I thought those records would show that he was working with the Pentagon and some large public relations firm, to suppress the American Small Business League's media campaign. And they wouldn't give it to me. I appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case. So the Small Business Administration would rather go to the Supreme Court than give you the phone records for their press office director.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one I lost, I was trying to stop the SBA from excluding, that $1 trillion in acquisitions from their calculation. I lost that one in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the only 2 lawsuits I've lost.
That's incredible. That's quite a track record.
You know what? I tell you something. I didn't really think about it. I didn't think about it till my lawyer was talking to me about it. And I called some people to see what they thought. I called the, I want to say it's the Freedom of Information Coalition, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them if that was a record. And they said they thought that it was. So if someone's won more than $110 Freedom of Information legal belts against the government, they should give me a call.
It's like you gotta give yourself a snappy title, like I'm the Manny Pacquiao of small business litigation or something like that.
Yeah, I've got a lot of funny names. I've but yeah, I was very flattered when some magazine said I was a modern day Cesar Chavez for small businesses. That was my favorite one. I think that was Entrepreneur. Yeah, that was my favorite.
That one's funny.
Yeah. One time, a CNN reporter called me the voice of small business in America. I'll tell you something funny. Let's turn this into a game show. The first one of your listeners that can show me the president of any group in Washington in the last decade that claims to represent small businesses on television, objecting to the government diverting small business contracts to Fortune 500 firms, I'll give him $1,000. All right. So the first person
$1,000 on the line, chat. There you go. Are they allowed to use the internet? Because I have a feeling, being on the internet, they might.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling I know why you're so confident dropping that kind of money on this.
$2,000. So the first person that could show me a video in the last decade of the president of any group in Washington claims to represent small businesses like the U.S. Chamber, the National Federation of Independent Business, the Black Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber, the Women's Chamber, the National Small Business Association, any of those groups, show me the president on national television objecting to the diversion of federal small business contracts to corporate giants. I give you $2,000. Is that fair?
They're saying it's been redacted. But I assume it doesn't exist, right?
No.
Yeah.
Here's another funny thing. Every group in Washington that claims to represent small businesses is essentially a lobby for Fortune 500 firms, and they're funded by Fortune 500 firms. And that surprised me. Back, this is 20 plus years ago, my idea of the American Small Business League, my idea was to get all these small business groups together and pool our resources and speak, to Congress with a much larger voice. But when I started researching these groups, I found out that they weren't really there for small businesses at all. Mm-hmm. It's called AstroTurf. You ever heard that term?
Yes, absolutely.
In Washington. So AstroTurf is a fake grassroots, campaign.
Yeah.
So all these groups that claim to represent small businesses, when you look at how they're funded either by the federal government or by Fortune 500 firms. I remember maybe a decade ago, I saw one of the larger groups in DC that claimed to represent small businesses was funded by Verizon. And of course, Verizon, one of their subsidiaries was getting federal small business contracts like 10, 15 years ago, right? But they're, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's one group in DC that claims to represent small businesses that I would call legitimate and actually, engages in activity like I do. I've been on, every TV news program in the country. I've had legislation introduced to Congress to stop this 3 times. I'm out there, and so the groups in DC are largely shams.
I got 2 questions from my chat. Do you mind if I ask them to you? I screened them. Don't worry. One is, what would UBI's effects be on small businesses? Would it be positive, negative, or neutral? UBI being a universal basic income.
Gosh, you know what? Its effect on small businesses, I would know the answer to that. That's sort of out of my area of expertise.
This one might be easier then. Say someone is part of a small business. How can they get these sort of contracts that you're mentioning? How can they be part of the 3%?
Well, there are a number of places on the internet you can go and look and see what the government's buying. And in your city, look at the locations of federal agencies in your vicinity, and they should all have a small business liaison officer. So every federal agency has a small business liaison officer. So you can contact them, and their job is to help you learn how to do business with that agency. That's their full-time job. And you can also try contacting the SB office, in your city. But again, most of those have been closed. But I think my best answer is contact the small business liaison officer for whichever federal agency you would like to work with, or prime contractors.
And in the case of trying to get Joe Biden to do what the program should be doing in the first place, which is getting 27% of that money out to small businesses, what could someone do if they wanted to push him in that direction?
Well, it's probably the most efficient economic stimulus program you could possibly come up with, to give them 23% of all federal contracts. And people just need to be, talking about it. To say the truth, I don't see much conversation about that anywhere on the internet, on Twitter, Facebook, social media. It doesn't come up. And what some people say is they'll say, well, government contracting, and that doesn't affect me. Yeah, it does. It affects everybody. It's the largest economic stimulus program for the American people in history. Nothing comes close. The Small Business Act is the single largest economic stimulus program for the American middle class that's ever been passed by Congress. And people just need to educate themselves about it a little bit. And people should be furious. They should be furious. So the purpose of an economic stimulus program is to create jobs, right? You want to create jobs, get people off of unemployment, get them paying taxes, right? And so the Small Business Act, to me, is the most efficient economic stimulus program that's ever been passed. And
the money's already being spent is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, it doesn't require any new taxes, doesn't require any changes. It's just,
it's deficit neutral. No new taxes, no new spending, no new legislation. Just comply with the law that's been on the books since 1953. And it's on the books today, in February of 2020 on the Small Business Act. 23% of all contracts should go to small businesses. And I just thought of this over the weekend about the fact that, half the population of America is women, and federal law only gives them 5% of the contracts. That means that, women are getting 5%, men are getting 95% of all federal contracts. Somebody should be outraged over that. That sounds outrageous. Don't you think that's outrageous? That's crazy, And 25% of the population is minority. They're getting 5%. So again, as we discussed, earlier on the show, the 25% of the population that's white males, they're getting around 90% of all federal spending. Mm-hmm. That's astounding. So, somebody should be upset about that, and
well, especially because it's taxpayer dollars at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's been a lot of protest, around the country in the last few months, and I'm surprised that no one seems to be bothered by the fact that they're being cheated out of, trillions. I think during the 4 years of the Trump administration, small businesses were cheated out of well over $1.2 trillion, and nobody said a word. Again, I realize why they didn't say anything, because they didn't know, because you can't talk about it on national television, because the Fortune 500 firms that are the customers of all national media don't want to hear Lloyd Chapman on national television saying the Fortune 500 firms haven't created one net new job in 40 years, right? That blows their whole scam. Cut our taxes so we can create jobs, right? So, you can't talk about that in the national media.
Wow. Lloyd, where can people find you? Do you want to plug all your social medias and respective stuff?
You know what? I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and you can go to my website. I'm working on a new website. It's ASBL.com. And you can go to the press room and look at all the different TV and media appearances. And I've got all my media on LloydChapman.com, LloydChapman.net. But people should be outraged. We're being cheated, and I think it's going to bring about a significant collapse of our economy, by the way, at some point in the near future. If the government continues to spend 97% of all of our tax dollars with that 1% of the companies that don't create jobs and don't pay taxes, I think it's going to destroy the economy. Just a matter of time.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Lloyd, thank you so much for your time. It was fascinating talking to you.
Have a good show.
All right, cheers. I love how many economic questions y'all were asking in the chat when I was like, he's not an economist. I mean, I've kind of ascertained that pretty quickly. He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer, you see. He's a lawyer for lawyering. I'll read. I don't know what you assume is going to come from me asking him for your $1,000. Do you think he will produce it on the spot? Do you think he's like, oh well, yes, I was waiting for Al Reed to speak up, and here is the $1,000 as you've been waiting for, sir, arriving. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation. Definitely. I'm like, I agree that's a massive program because that money is already being spent. That to me is something that is pretty egregious. If you're already spending that many millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer dollars and the money is just going to these fucking rich corporations, that is a problem. The other thing being though is that I noticed it's hard for me to wrap my head around the idea of this solely being about the little guy when, I mean, as in essence, for the little guy, small businesses, I'm not against small businesses. I'd like to see small businesses, thrive versus, just having a series of monopolies have this complete and utter control over everything that we eat and breathe and watch and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I want to see more emphasis also being put towards having democracy in the workplace, because I think we need to extend democracy to the workplace. I think that's as crucial as making sure that small businesses thrive. Well, they should also be collectively owned businesses as well. So people at the end of the day aren't just fighting for minimum wage to be able to get that minimum wage and just survive, just get through life start to finish. I would imagine that people would have a much vested interest working for companies in which they actually were co-owners in, like they had skin in the game. Depressing and enlightening, I'll say that. Yes, I agree simultaneously. If you want us to advertise your channel or work, please go to weareserfs.com and email us a 20 to 30 second ad, and we'll take it on to the end of one of our videos to help promote your leftist channel or progressive something, whatever you do.
To our gods, Anra, Xander Corvus, Schlatsky, we look to the stars for your divine guidance. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are merely puppets for your amusement. To our lords, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Hans Josephine, Ryan Lubin, Timothy K. Meeblebeeps Jr., Bisexual Black Gamer, and Tofox, we shall carry your banner into the fog of war. To our Knights of the Round Table, Josh Mickelson, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Political Puppy, Jimmy Bignuts, Andreas Chiringuito, Yoppie, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Thomas Barrington, J. Fraser Cartwright, Goofalankius, Melissa Murphy, Nicholas Marks, Radical Maniac, The Great Pudini, Kale Kotka, Anthropophagic, Serene 42, Chronic de Hemphog, Phone Jenny, Incosin, Constance Joyce Lacheris, and Ramon Acosta, we drink with you and we salute you.